Hi everyone, Astrothony World Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Juice WRLD record Death Race for Love with its amazing PlayStation game cover. This is a new record from Chicago rapper, singer, songwriter, Mr. Juice WRLD, who through a pretty major hit last year, Lucid Dreams, has found himself at the cutting edge of this new emo trap wave, which is a style of music that sounds just as it is described. You have trap beats and aesthetics being fused with the melodramatic and heartbroken vocals and lyricism of emo music. This is a huge sound at this point that I think could be the next big phase for hip-hop, as a lot of newer artists who are hitting right now do have verses that trend toward being vulnerable and even confessional. From more contemporary dudes like Trippie Redd, and even going as far back as Drake, who has been around forever at this point. But even though this sound is really popular right now, it's been a kind of tumultuous couple of years for it because of some major losses of huge voices within the scene. You're talking about XXXTentacion and Lil Peep. But as long as the audience continues to demand this stuff, this sound and style are probably not going anywhere anytime soon. And speaking of giving the audience what they want on this record, much of Juice WRLD's writing here sounds like it was directly influenced by the popularity of his own past singles. The song Maze off this record literally sounds like Juice WRLD copying over the entire Lucid Dreams formula onto this track, changing the beat, changing the sound a little bit, altering the flow very slightly, and whipping the melody up, basically just recycling a lot of these used ideas and hoping to get another go-around out of them. There's also quite a bit of guitar sampling on this record, or maybe just synth patches that sound like guitar. Either way, more guitar presence. And I would say the influence that 2000s emo pop has had on Juice WRLD's very nasally vocals on this album has increased at least 2 or 3-fold. A lot of Juice WRLD's singing and verses on these tracks varies between hilariously corny and profoundly depressing, typically falling on a healthy middle ground between those two. And even though there are a lot of listeners that might listen to what Juice WRLD does and instantly cringe, when he does it well and brings through a very catchy song, it actually speaks to me quite a bit. And honestly, despite his talent, I think Juice WRLD does continue to be underrated as a lyricist. Many forget his hour-long freestyle. I know there are quite a few songs on this thing that emphasize very cute but depressing wordplay, like These Pills Are My Pro Tools, Still Got Logic, which is just one example of many
2 hours later.
Many lines on this album that reference Juice WRLD's negative feelings and his heartbreak and his insecurities, driving him to popping pills, doing drugs. Even though Juice comes through with some very clever wordplay on a majority of these tracks, the baseline themes that most of these songs revolve around are not that varied, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're making a record that is emotionally potent, is straightforward, hits hard, very catchy. But Death Race for Love is 72 minutes long and 22 tracks, which is something that going into this record, I did not want to believe would be a problem because, you know, for the most part, I do like what Juice WRLD tries to do. I like what he represents. I thought maybe he'd pull through, maybe it would be hits on hits on hits, and maybe he would show audiences that he could kind of break his sound and style up, try some new stuff, take some risks, and succeed. But that's only sort of the case on this record. There are some pretty good and amped tracks on this album where Juice does try to give audiences a bit of a break from a lot of the druggy and sad ballads on this record. But in the process of chasing after these more in-your-face sounds, there is kind of a loss of personality. The song Syphilis is like a distorted SoundCloud banger, which you can really hear Juice chasing after in the second half when he's attempting Ski Mask's kind of goofy, fast triplet flows. The song On God invites Young Thug onto a beat that you would usually hear on a Young Thug album, a very glistening, pretty, smooth trap beat, and Juice WRLD ends up just sounding like a feature on his own song. I do appreciate Juice trying his best to break up the monotony of this very lengthy track list, but the redundancy on this album really does set in on the last leg. Not only in terms of a lot of these songs sounding the same, but Juice WRLD kind of running out of song ideas too. The song 10 Feet features some pretty decent rapping that sounds a little vintage to my ears. It's got a good pace to it, but the song eventually trails off into this weird instrumental outro that doesn't really go anywhere. The tune on She's the One is so painfully sluggish, I just can't wait for it to end. The song Rider, thematically, I'm pretty sure Juice WRLD has already explored this topic to death, of finding or having a significant other that will like Ride For You is devoted to you. And on this entire record, I'm not sure if there's a more pointless song than Make Believe. A track whose instrumental is really tedious, completely cluttered. I hate the guitars in it. Melodically, Juice WRLD isn't really doing much, and the whole track brings no closure whatsoever to the entire record. The first portion of this album does have a few misses in it, but it hits a great stride. And there is a point toward the end of this record where it completely loses sight of its own flow, and ends up sounding like a jumbled pile of random songs that were maybe too clean to end up on the cutting room floor, but weren't really great enough to feature on the first half of this album. It makes me wonder if Juice WRLD really understands what exactly about his music appeals to people. Because if you truly had a sense of that, you wouldn't just be throwing anything that you made at the wall and hoping it would stick. Nor would you be literally copying over the equation for your previous hits and just trying to like redo them. Because instead of crafting a good coherent album, Juice WRLD has gone culture 2 with it and has just flooded fans with songs that he hopes turn out into an unexpected hit. These rappers are like dropping compilations masquerading as albums at this point. I do kind of respect that he didn't overload this album with features though. Even though I have an issue with how bloated and repetitive this album is, that's not to say there aren't highlights on here. The song Empty to my ears feels like Juice WRLD 2.0. He's come back with essentially the same tricks, but they're kind of fine-tuned so that he sounds even more depressing this time around. And over an incredibly glamorous and beautiful instrumental. Feeling empty, so goddamn empty. Also, when he drops lines on this thing like I problem solve with styrofoam, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. The track Fast is another highlight for me, incredibly hooky, very mellow, and hits hard despite its very subtle presentation. Some of Juice's vocalizations, especially on the hook, kind of remind me of Post Malone. It does have that soft, chill, but catchy trap ballad Post Malone-y type feel, I guess. There is the hilariously titled HEMOTIONS, whose Muddy Emotions hook is catchier than maybe I would like it to be, despite how cringy I think some of the lyrics are. The song Robbery, hands down, is now my favorite Juice WRLD track, not only for its incredibly endearing and sad instrumental, but also Juice WRLD's heart-wrenching performance on this thing. Tell me put my heart in the bag and nobody gets hurt. This chorus sounds like it was ripped straight out of like an old Fall Out Boy or Simple Plan album. This is like the purest embodiment of emo trap, period. The song Ring Ring is one of the few fusions of hip hop and pop punk that I think I've ever enjoyed. Juice WRLD singing his heart out about not wanting to pick up the phone and just be alone. Clever actually stuns on this song with his feature, stands out as the best feature on the entire album in my opinion. His vocals are just so over the top and immense emotionally. Even though that Postmates line that he drops does kind of make me raise my eyebrow a little bit, it does. There's some great moments on here, but honestly, Juice WRLD waters the record down with a lot of songs that should have just ended up on a random friggin' mixtape dropped maybe several months after the release of this album. Because if you really wanted to boil this record down to its best and its finest moments, you would have to throw out at least a third of this LP. And that's sad, that's unfortunate, that sucks. Because at this point I still think Juice is one of the more talented rappers, singers, and voices in the current hip-hop field. He does punch under his weight lyrically sometimes, because maybe he drops a lot of sad and sappy tracks that feature lyrics that fans of bars and braggadocio and just kind of macho attitudes in hip-hop might not mess with. But you know, he has tracks like Out My Way that are incredibly good, equally good as some of the best sad cuts on this record, and they feature exactly that badass, angry attitude, and they do it so well. So Juice WRLD does have some great singles on here, and he does have some amazing detours where he tries something a little different, which would have provided some great variety on a shorter and more succinct album. But instead he kneecapped this thing, essentially for the sake of some extra streams in the short term, and that's it. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Juice WRLD, forever.